The hardtop, when it came along with the XA model, was such a departure for Ford racing vehicles in Australia. If you think the XR GT, the first Australian muscle car, the quintessential muscle car, was based on a four-door, quite boxy Falcon sedan. And we saw those cars from XR to XT to XW to XY all being successful on the racetrack, and then boom, out came this beautiful two-door hardtop. And people had never seen anything like that here from Ford. You know, two doors, big bulbous guards on it, very low squatted stance. It was really quite a sensation when it came out.
I saw the two-door as a good car. I reckoned it would be aerodynamically much better, and it was.
Yes, and it's Goss, Moffat, French, Gibson and Brock, who's very close to the big V8s. It's a cracking pace. They're really standing on the anchors to slow them for Murray.
It had a different characteristic. It was a wonderful car on fast sweepers and stuff like that. It was much superior to the box section shape of the Phase 3 in that regard. And straight away it was 10 to 15 miles an hour faster at Bathurst, mainly, not all because of power, but mainly because of the aero form.
John Goss now got a tremendous opportunity to carry the Ford flag all the way home.
They were a big change to the hose that I'd driven before. They still didn't have great brakes. They still weren't very light in the steering. They were still sort of a bit cumbersome, sort of a car to drive, you know, but I gauge it by what we were driving at the time, and really they were quite good motor cars, and plenty of sniff, you know, from the Cleveland engines.
Moffat and Gibson close together. Then French with Brock right on his hammer. He can't shake the Tirana.
The car wasn't like it was the world-beating car it was going to be. The Phase 4, or whatever you want to call it, or the two-door, was only a development of the Phase 3, so it really wasn't going to be the supercar like they branded it. So to get into the two-door situation was just like a HO as a two-door to the new regulations. And we had a mule car or test car we started off with was Ford Motor Company, which was a yellow two-door. And that became the car they did all the testing on. I did a lot of testing at Calder, and we tried it at Emery Park and places like that well before we built the first blue and white first cars. So that became part of our sort of program before we went racing with the new cars.
Unfortunately, they were a bit fragile because you weren't allowed to do modifications in any way, and they had a lot of oil surge problems. So in that respect, the 73 car was a bit fragile.
When Ford introduced the XA Falcon in 1972, it marked a major departure from its styling template, especially with the new two-door hardtop version. In the wake of the 1972 supercar scare that killed off the plans for the potent Phase 4 GTHO, the new GT version of the XA wasn't ready to take its place on the racetrack. However, with a 351 cubic inch V8 rated at 300 horsepower, performance was adequate and gave racers something to work with. Some, like Alan Moffat and the Ford Works team, continued to race the older GTHO Phase 3 in the first half of 1973, on their way to winning the Australian Touring Car Championship. However, Sydney driver John Goss was keen to start developing the new car immediately.
A lot of people were expecting the Ford Works team to roll into 1973 with these brand new XA hardtops, because they'd been released in August of 72, so naturally there was an expectation that they'd roll into 73 with the new cars. But what a lot of people didn't realise, that Ford had done some initial testing on the XA, and they realised they were so far out of the zone in terms of that car being competitive that hotting up a Phase 3 was really the best way to go until they could get the testing, get the development done behind the scenes of the hardtop, so it was ready for later in 73. But Johnny Goss had a different idea. He thought, no, I don't want to wait that long. It's an exciting car, it's a new car, I want to have a go at it. So Goss, against the Works team's wishes, decided to head out on his own development path.
I got fond memories of the association I had with those cars, and we developed that car ahead of the factory even. And that wasn't because we wanted to be in conflict with Ford Motor Company, but it was just the way it happened at the time, and the fact that they decided a strategy where Alan Moffat continued into the 73 Touring Championship with the XY. So Ford built this car for us in 72, late 72, and it was shipped to Sydney. It was specially constructed for me for racing, and we developed it during the Christmas break, 72-3, and we we ran a fairly comprehensive season with it in '73, although I wasn't in a position to follow all of the rounds of the Drivers' Championship.
Well, he wasn't very well respected by doing that because Ford didn't want him to run the car. Because the whole thing is they wanted to run two doors when the two doors were ready to run and be competitive. And I think he ran the two door because that's JG. He wanted to run a car before anyone else. And then we had so much oil surge with the new two doors, with the sort of grip we had on the cars, with the wheels and tyres we could run. We were having engine problems. And John, I think, in the first time he ran the car, whatever meeting it was, he sort of did an engine in. So the thing is, they weren't too happy. I know Howard Marsden wasn't very happy with John doing that, but he did run a two-door before the factory did.
Moffat switched his lights on as he comes up to XL. Brock's starting to make up ground. He's just 2.5 seconds behind.
They were obviously a very fast motor car, and particularly when we went to places like Bathurst, where you could use the power going up the hills. And we just sort of noticed that the XU1 was fine on most of the smaller tracks that we drove and competed against them. But at Bathurst it was probably qualifying and being held up for the first lot of laps by what I would say the slower Fords, but they were capable of passing up Mountain Straight, for argument's sake, and then you'd be on their hammer and you try and nail them across the top, and then they'd overtake you again down, you know, one of the other straights, until you finally got to a stage where you're probably 10 laps into the race. You could get rid of them, but in the meantime, the factory cars and the very good Falcons have actually got quite a gap on you.
Another non-factory driver working on developing the XAGT hardtop into a race car was Victorian Murray Carter.
The same components that were going into the Phase 4, I put into the XA. So that gave me a race car. I bought a standard XA and converted it with the same basics as what was in the XY, because although it took wider wheels, there was a few privileges, but there again we suffered a weight advantage too. It was a heavier car, but at that stage we raced a production car.
He was in a unique position there because he was very closely allied to the Works Ford race team, but a lot of people didn't realise how close that alliance was. Murray Carter ran his own mechanical and tuning business. He had his own engine dynamometer, which is extraordinary when you think about it today, but the Works team didn't have an engine dyno, but Murray Carter did. So there was an opportunity there for the Works team to use Murray's facilities behind the scenes to dyno engines, to test new components, and that was a very good relationship they had going there because they could actually test components in Murray's car without raising any suspicion, because Murray, for all his efforts, he wasn't a Works team, he was never going as fast as the Works cars, so of course his cars never raised any suspicion. So there was plenty of opportunities for the Ford Works team to utilise Murray in that way, and he was quite happy to oblige.
One of the biggest impediments to racing success in the XAGT was severe engine oil surge, caused by a small capacity standard road car sump that was inadequate for the demands placed on it under the new Group C touring car rules.
Oil surge was a particular problem in the XAs because one of the fundamental differences between when the new hardtop came out compared to the previous XY four-door, it had these very, very big wheel arches in it, and they were designed into the car with the mentality that if the Phase 4 had continued the Phase 5, the GTHO program, the Phase 5 would have moved into the two-door hardtop body, and they deliberately made the wheel wells and the guards on that car quite large so they could take some big racing rubber. Now, while that was wonderful from a performance aspect, there was another thing that they hadn't thought about, and that was the fact that you go to a bigger tyre, you've got more grip, so you go through the corners faster, and that causes surge in the engine. And remember, these were only standard production engines with very small oil capacity, standard sumps. So when you start loading those things up with higher G-forces, not just in cornering, but in acceleration and braking as well, you have this tremendous problem in the engine where you've only got a standard amount of oil in there just for a normal production engine, and you're putting it through G-forces that it's not designed for. And the oil surges in the engine. You think about it. I think a Falcon sump in those days had about 4 litres of oil in it. Half of that at any one time, when the engine's revving hard, is suspended in the engine doing the lubricating. So down in the sump there is effectively like a bit of gravy in the bottom of a baking tray just sloshing from side to side. As soon as that exposed the oil pickup, you got air in the system and bang. And they were blowing up a lot of engines.
Well, the oil surge was something we already were familiar with the XY. And I mean, the popular myth is that these cars had a weakness. It wasn't a weakness, it was the nature of the regulation, which meant that we couldn't alter the external profile of the sun. Now, Harry Firth worked that to his advantage. General Motors made changes. Ford were not willing to make those production changes, and that inability of Ford Motor Company to make certain production changes wasn't clearly seen by CAMS for whatever reason, whether that was democratic or not. So as Ford entrants, we suffered severely, and we'd suffered for 2 or 3 seasons prior to that, particularly with the Phase 3. As the cornering speeds went up, the oil surge became more apparent.
The Ford Works team finally turned out in the new cars for the first time in 1973 at the first round of the Manufacturers' Championship in Adelaide, with a new corporate blue and white colour scheme. The new hardtops featured many engine and drivetrain components developed for the GTHO Phase 4 and a complex twin electric pump oiling system. In atrocious wet conditions, they had immediate success. The factory drivers Fred Gibson and Alan Moffat finished first and third, with Kevin Bartlett and John Goss's car in second, completing the XA GT trifecta.
The amazing thing about when the Works team turned up with their hardtops for the first round of the Manufacturers' Championship in Adelaide, those cars had not turned a wheel. Those guys were really chasing their tails with the build on those cars because of industrial strikes earlier in the year. The whole program was very much behind schedule. So they rolled up there at Adelaide for that first Man-Champ round with those cars never having turned a wheel. So it was just an extraordinary effort by the guys to turn those cars around. Brand new cars, a lot of equipment admittedly carried over from the Phase 3, but they were a whole new kettle of fish. And to rock up there at that first round and score a 1-2-3 result, well, that's just a debut dream, isn't it?
I suppose we're a bit lucky in Adelaide. We run Goodyear tyres, and Alan probably had the best Goodyear tyres in the country because he was sponsored by Goodyear, and Alan's wets were better than anyone else's wets, even though if he had Goodyears, his wets were special wets. And when it looked like being a wet race, like Alan said, well, I got the wets, we'll just run our wets, they were really good wets, because round there the Tiranas would have been hard to beat. And I think Brocky and Bondi would have been hard to beat on the day, and I don't think we even had pole. I don't know, I forget now, but the whole thing is like, you know, it rained, and I think Alan had electrical problems, something wrong with the car. It was our first gig with the car. Like I remember when the cars arrived, it was Ford Motor Company's new transporter, and the cars are blue and white. It was a whole big new scene, and to give them a win in the first meeting we went to was pretty special.
At the next round at Sandown, the Holden dealer team brought the Fords back down to earth, with Peter Brock and Colin Bond taking the top 2 spots. Moffat was leading handsomely until one of the electric oil pumps failed, resulting in engine failure.
We could still win the race. It was sort of, Sandown was very hard on brakes, of course, and I think when they bring a new car out, it takes a while to get some of the little things sorted out. There were some oil surge problems with the cars and other things like that. I know every year we brought out a brand new car to go to Bathurst. When we go to Bathurst, we'd say, we should have been running the old car this year because they were fully sorted cars. The new car was always quicker, of course, but seemed to have some little nagging problems.
We had great expectations after Adelaide. The car was half competitive, and we thought Sandown it would be as well. But like, you know, Sandown's a different sort of circuit altogether, Adelaide. I think we put a pretty good show up there, and the cars were pretty reliable there. It was just a matter they weren't quick enough.
Howard Marsden knew the cars needed 4-wheel disc brakes because the competition was getting hotter. They knew that they couldn't survive with these rear drum brakes, so going to a 4-wheel disc brake setup was absolutely essential if that car was going to be a success. So the homologation process had started, but they weren't going to get the cars across the line. They weren't getting the brakes actually rubber stamped and ready for use until the Bathurst 1000 that year. So as a little bit of a sneaky, I don't know, a test in true racing conditions, the Ford Works team decided to fit these disc brakes to the back of a third car that they ran at the Sandown 250 that was driven by Pete Gagan. And the extraordinary thing is about that whole process, these disc brakes were not homologated, but this car with the disc brakes fitted went through scrutineering, went through all the inspections, through practice, through qualifying, actually got into the race without anyone really noticing that this car was fitted with rear brakes that really weren't legal at the time. And of course, because it was a development exercise, one of the axles snapped, the wheel broke off, And of course there was this wheel sitting there with this disc brake in it, which was very embarrassing for the works team.
There it goes, the 1973 Hardy Perotto 1000 is off.
Bathurst that year was run over 1,000 kilometres for the first time, and 5 XA GTs were entered. The works team had overcome the electric pump problem, and all the hardtops were now equipped with 4-wheel disc brakes. For John Goss, his early experience with the car seemed to be paying dividends.
We went to Bathurst as a good driver combination, in my view. We were very much a private team, although we had a lot of support over the years from Ford, but we put that car on pole position, and we were able to understate the fact that we'd been first onto the Australian circuits with that car, and I had ideas about gearing, which I was able to confirm in Easter '73 when we actually entered the car as a sports sedan. So we had some minor advantages in the way the cars were set up. It wasn't that we had horsepower advantage or anything like that. I qualified that car on pole position in 1973, and I remember receiving a bonus of $10,000. And that's worth thinking about today, when there's a lot of propaganda being pushed around about how much money there is in motor racing today. We dominated the race, and we dominated that race for probably 4.5 of the 6 hours. And then I got tangled up in some debris up through the cutting. We had a complication with an oil radiator. We had, in the end, deterioration of the engine, and I drove the car into the pits and retired it. And in a way, I retired it with pride, because I'd made a mark on that great event. We'd, by that time in history, qualified on pole position and dominated the Bathurst 1000 against both the factory teams.
Moffat and co-driver Pete Gagan claimed victory, but it was a race that Brock and veteran co-driver Doug Chivis should have won in the Tirana XU1.
Moffat won Bathurst in '73, but I think even Alan would admit, and the works team would admit, they were very fortunate indeed, because the V8 cars had a big advantage on Conrod Straight, on the big straights at Mount Panorama, but beyond that, the Holden dealer team Tiranas in Group C trim just had the wood on them. They were faster through the corners, they handled better, they braked better, they had better fuel economy, they were all over these guys. And really, there was a critical point in that race, because there was no way those big blue and white hardtops were going to get through that race on less than 3 fuel stops. The Holden dealer team, with their more economical 6-cylinder engines, reckoned they could do it at 2. At a stretch, they really thought they could do it at 2. And there was a stage in that race where the Holden dealer team car was about 1.5 minutes up the road from Moffat, and Moffat was still to make another fuel stop. So they had it in the bag. I mean, they really just had them on the ropes at that stage. And then, of course, there was that extraordinary situation where, to make sure they were going to get through on 2 stops, they asked Dougie Chivers, who was sharing the lead car with Peter Brock, to get maximum laps. I'll never forget that. There's that board they're holding up, you see it on the footage, get max laps, because they just wanted to stretch that second fuel load to make absolutely sure they'd have enough to get through to the end of the race on 2 stops. And of course, we know what happened there. Just one little miscalculation. I don't know how much they missed out by, but the car ran out of fuel on that last lap. And of course, Dougie Chivers stranded there trying to push the car up pit straight. They lost about 4 or 5 minutes in that exercise. That allowed Moffat to get back in front, have enough time up his sleeve for his final stop to win the race. But extraordinary situation. I think everyone must look back on that race from the Holden dealer team and say that was definitely one that got away.
It's Gibson, he's out. Look at that smoke. I'd say the engine's cooked from the hot pace.
Of course, we were probably using the engine too hard, or I was, revving it, is what we were going to do. She blew the engine on the top of the mountain in a big way. So I walked back. I remember walking back through the middle of the circuit, from the top of the mountain back to the pits, down across the fences. There was vines there. There was all sorts of rubbish to get there. To let Howard know that I think the engine should be dropped, the revs down the engine, and I think Pete and Alan won the race. We dropped the revs from 7,000 maybe to 6,000, I forget now, but we just dropped the revs down and the engine survived and they won the race.
At the beginning of 1974, Ford dropped a bombshell by announcing it was withdrawing from direct factory support of motor racing in Australia.
Well, it was devastating when Ford pulled out of motorsport. There was a bit of backdoor support with components and parts, but they were effectively out of it. So you had a situation where arch rival GMH was gearing up to launch their new V8 Tirana and going hell for leather at this motorsport thing, whereas Ford had basically turned their back on it and said, no, we don't want to know. And that was reflected on the racetrack, because in 1974, you had Alan Moffat, Fred Gibson, John Goss and Murray Carter. There were effectively only 4 guys running Falcon hardtops against a swarm of Tiranas, which included XU1 Tiranas and the new, the V8, the L34 Tirana. So it was terribly imbalanced on the racetrack. And for a Ford fan, pretty demoralising.
Well, I suppose when Ford all of a sudden decided they were pulling out of motorsport again, like they normally do sometimes like that, and I think we raced the last race, the Manufacturers' Championship, and right, was Phillip Island that year. And Alan rolled his car over, because what the deal was, at the end of the series, Ford were going to say, well, you guys can have the cars, a car each, sort of, to go and do what we want to do with them. And in the meantime, at the last race, Alan rolled over. I don't know what, he hit something, rolled the car over, so it demolished the car. So it was my car left, and also the test car was left. So I took the test car, the yellow test car, and made that into the Castrol car run out of my Sydney workshop. And Alan took my old car over, and I think they become the Fabergé car or something that he raced at Bathurst. So that's where the cars went, sort of, really. But like I didn't have the money to support the car like Alan did, so I sold the car. I think Jim Keogh bought it.
Without the factory's involvement, it's very difficult. Remember, we're racing a production car. It's not like any other form of motorsport. You need the support from the manufacturer, and we didn't have it. That was to, in the end, dictate my withdrawal from racing a Ford.
New Falcon hardtop. Tough enough to get through when you have to get through, come hell or high water.
Ford had introduced an updated version of the hardtop in late 1973 called the XB, with a revised nose and taillight styling. It made its track debut in early 1974. Alan Moffat, who'd been racing with support from the Fabergé company, dropped out of the Australian Touring Car Championship battle early and took his car to the United States for a complete performance makeover.
He redeveloped the car in America with a guy called Lee Dykstra, and that's when they come back with the Lee Dykstra designed two-door Falcon Virtue within the regulations, and it was a supercar. It was a supercar.
Because that car was destroyed a couple of years later, no one ever really got to have a good look at it. But when you think of what Lee Dykstra did with the Trans Am Mustangs, for instance, which was his little baby during the Trans Am era, the mind boggles at what he did to that Falcon hardtop, because it really was something special. There were all sorts of rumours about it. Had completely reconfigured suspension. It had much bigger tyres on the back than no one else can fit. It had all these things in it. A lot of mystery surrounding the car. But it was, no doubt it was quick. It was a very fast car.
The XB GT race car also gained new front and rear spoilers and continued rebuilding the GTHO Phase 4 piece by piece through the homologation process.
Let's watch him though. The field goes towards the start after his pass. Rocky made a bad start and is backing Bob Jane on the outside after Colin Bond. But it's Bond first, and then on the outside of the big Falcon and going hard was Bobby Jane, but it's the Falcon in second spot. And Bond has a long lead.
At Bathurst in '74, Holden came equipped with its powerful new L34 V8 Tiranas.
And into the pits goes Alan Moffat in car number 33. Alan Moffat into the pits now, as in third position. He's got lots of troubles apparently, and the bonnet up.
If Ford fans had hoped Moffat would lead the charge for them, they would have been bitterly disappointed. But their saviour appeared in the form of John Goss in his older but well-proven XA-GT and his co-driver Kevin Bartlett.
Bathurst 74 was the payoff for Gossie, because don't forget in 73 he'd gone up there with a different race plan to go out there and just smack them all really hard. Put the car on pole position, was leading the race handsomely early on until he got involved with an accident and a few other things. And that was the end of the 73 race. But what Gossie learned from 73 was that reliability was more important than outright speed.
John Goss still carrying the Ford flag pretty well. He's quite a way back, but he's well placed to do well if something goes wrong with those two leading cars.
We built just one engine, and brought it to the latest amendments in terms of homologation. I think there was a particular Ford part number piston and camshaft we were able to incorporate into the car. So we developed an engine with about 420 horsepower, and we had a well-proven chassis, but it was fatigued, and I'd repaired it as I could.
So what's going to happen with Peter Brock's car smoking like fury, Colin Bond in the pits, Bob Forbes looking as though he might suddenly inherit first place, John Goss looking as though he might jump from fourth to second, and Brock is in far more trouble than ever Colin Bond has been in. That's pouring out his exhaust pipe. And the crowd is starting to cheer and to go mad. The 20-deep crowd on pit straight waving their arms in unison as John Goss last pass.
That was the status of our approach to Bathurst in '74. And again, Kevin was pleased to come with me, and we went up there. We had a consistent result in practice. We didn't go there with the intent of trying to compete for pole position. I think we qualified on the second row of the grid. We had an uneventful entry into the race. I drove the first stint. We went on into the late morning. Through lunchtime, Kevin was driving. I went back into the car. But during the afternoon, the weather deteriorated, and that upset the planned strategy in terms of pit stops and so on. And it left us in a position where I'd been in the car for nearly 3 hours, I think, from memory. But to come back to your point, towards that last pit stop, I had no option but to enter the pits and hand the car over to Kevin. It wasn't that I didn't want him to get in the car. I'd have been more than glad for him to get in a lot earlier, because it wasn't easy. And during that time, I had tremendous difficulty seeing out of the cockpit, and in the end, not so much just through lack of visibility, but fatigue as much as anything else, I aquaplaned off the road along the top and broke the right front wheel, punctured the tyre, of course. Managed to keep going. My instinct was to try and get that car back to the pits, so I drove the remaining length of that lap with the right front wheel on the soft earth verge wherever I could, and managed to eventually cross the straight well down and enter the pit lane, and just about made it to the pits, and the wheel had further fragmented by then. So Alan Moffat had retired by then, and Alan came forward. I wasn't aware of this, of course, but he loaned us a set of his Goodyear wet weather wheel and tyre assemblies, the Globe wheel, which we're also using on my car. And Kevin was able to get in refreshed, and he drove into a very difficult challenge to get that car from there to the end of the race. By now the circuit had deteriorated to an extent that today would certainly bring about a red flag. But we drove on, and in the end Kevin was able to stabilise the gap back to a private XU L34, Bob Forbes car, and he diligently drove that mighty car with the tail hanging out in that last 30 or 40 minutes and crossed the line, and I was very pleased to see that from the pits, no doubt about it.
We've never had a finish like this at Bathurst, and in the lead is Kevin Butler, the old hand of racing. So badly injured earlier this year in a race at New Zealand. Who would have thought he'd have recovered from those terrible injuries to be in a car leading Bathurst in the closing laps of this race? What exciting laps. Talking of excitement, things still happening, cars spinning on the circuit here, which slowed him down. He got back a little bit.
Driving
Kevin
the
Barnett
car
has to finish now
smooth and clean and not worrying too much about what the gap was. And I could see the gap on the board. They're a little bit closer, and I just lurch a little bit further ahead and try just a little bit further. No, that's too far. I better not do that, blah, blah, blah. And you work it out clinically in your own mind how deep you're going to go under brakes, so you can do it consistently. But the challenge in the wet, of course, was the fact that patches of the road would have little streams running across them. And what I had virtually worked out in my own mind was, all right, I'll change gear at that stream because I don't want a wheel spin across it, and I'll do a slow gear change, and when I get on the other side it'll be dry. And it was working fine everywhere. It just fell into place. And another problem with the car, of course, is the wipers don't work, do they? No, well, it's always the way. When it rains, the wipers don't work. You only need them when it's dry, of course. But the misting and all of that in the car They weren't a great car as far as ventilation is concerned, let me tell you. They weren't clever. And with the window down, you really needed to have the whole car open, but of course the buffeting and the weather would come in on you, and it wasn't comfortable. It was a challenge, but I enjoyed the challenge. Yeah, I was quite happy with our performance, the team's performance, because it was a team job.
1975 was a miserable year for Ford fans, with only one driver regularly putting his car on the grid. Privateer Murray Carter in his XB-GT.
Very early in the season, Moffat had lost his sponsorship, his Fabergé sponsorship. So there was no longer any Brute 33 Mustang or Brute 33 Falcon. So he did the first few rounds of the championship, but he had a few problems and basically pulled out to regroup, because he was obviously working on a new program for Bathurst, because that was the most important race, obviously. So Moffat was out. Goss didn't run in any of the Australian Touring Car Championship because he was concentrating on his Formula 5000 program. So often Murray Carter was the only Falcon in the field. I mean, it was just awful. People would go to these race meetings and there'd be, you know, heaps and heaps of Tiranas and one Falcon running around. Now, to Carter's credit, he did very well. He was very consistent. He built a reliable car. He wasn't as fast as the Tiranas, but he was certainly competitive, and he ended up coming second in that championship. So that was an outstanding effort, not only for a Ford driver, but a privateer as well.
I used to get a lot of assistance with product, not money, product. And I did a bit of development for the Fords, because I've got an engine dynamometer, and we did some of the engine development work, mainly for reliability. And but that's about as much support as I got.
You know, Murray's been around. I think he's still driving. You know, he was a very good driver. You know, and he would look. I would say you keep to the older motor cars sometimes, and as I said previously, that often when you went to the next race meeting, you think sometimes, golly, if we had had the old car with all the bugs sorted out, we would have done much better than the new car that had some slight problems. And I think Murray just had a car that was very well sorted and was able to get it to the finish. And if you can do that in those sort of championships, you're always going to score very well in points, and at the end of the day, you come out very well.
Well, I dare say it was a period that we had done a lot of development work in reliability. Reliability was probably one of the biggest downfalls of the Cleveland engine. And I spent a lot of time on the dyno trying to build performance and reliability into it. And I dare say it was just through consistency, but we had a good run.
One of the funniest things about that 75 season was that, now I don't know whether this is true or not, but they were joking in the paddock that some Holden executives had approached Murray Carter with the offer of some secret funding, with the sole reason being that if Carter was out there, at least they had one Ford that they could beat. That's how bad it was.
There was one guy that I knew that was a Holden. No, he was well up in Holden. I don't want to mention his name, but me being the only Ford, because Holden needed to beat Ford, so he said we should sponsor you, but it never happened.
For Murray Carter, it wasn't so much a case of David versus Goliath or Ford versus Holden. It was more a case of testing himself against the best in the business.
Last year, and then Warren Cullen just being lapped by Murray Carter. So Carter has now come up, having passed O'Brien, Blanchard and now Cullen. He's moved himself up to behind Bruce Hardtop and only 2 positions behind Alan Moffat. So a very consistent drive by Murray Carter, and I think this is the sort of pattern of the race that Murray Carter runs. He sets himself a certain lap speed, the others might sprint a little bit for a start, but Murray Carter just has that same pattern. You could almost set your watch by him that he'll come around every lap at exactly the same time, and now that's starting to pay off because he's getting a good run through the traffic.
Racing against those guys was probably always the yard mark, because as I developed the car, and mainly keeping reliability into it to see how I could bridge that gap with those guys. But motor racing has always been my passion right from a young boy, and I would have raced regardless, whether I ran last or in any sort of a position, and I always thought, well, that's great. So it was just one of those things that I would have done regardless of where I ran.
Away they go, and Alan Moffat gets going more quickly in first gear. I don't think he's working the car hard as he lets Colin Bond jump to the front and head into the corner first. He positions himself behind Bond.
Only 3 Falcons entered the great race in 1975, with Moffat and Gagan, Goss and Bartlett, and Carter and Ray Winter taking on the large fleet of Tirana L34s.
Alan Moffat was saying he was building the car for down the straight. Now he may be outbraked, but let's see, it's side by side. Bond is going a little later. He'll take a very difficult line on the outside. Moffat is not going to let him through. In fact, he closes up again because he knows he's got the line and he's going to shoulder Colin Bond out of it if he possibly can. And now it's all acceleration up to the line. This is only third lap, and already it is neck and neck. This is Goss coming into the pits, last year's winner. The man who had so much trouble yesterday, was going quickly but coming into the pitch in a very slow way. He's got something that's a bit troublesome there.
However, all 3 Falcons were forced out with mechanical problems, and Peter Brock won easily.
2 of the best prepared teams in Australia, and we're sitting here in the pits fixing things which we just take chances with.
In 1976, Alan Moffat's team had a more professional look about it and was more competitive. Ford was not officially backing him, but speculation was otherwise.
1976 was a funny year because Moffat had raced at Bathurst in 75. The car had failed. He had a new commercial relationship with International Harvester, and he rolled into 76 with this car still in its red and gold paintwork from 75, but looking very, very much like a factory race car, i.e. Ford, Motorcraft, BP, Goodyear. That was about the only thing on the car. And he was very quick. The car was obviously going very quick. So there were people sort of thinking, hang on a minute, Moffat doesn't have any major commercial sponsor, but he is going really, really well here. And this is when people started to twig that perhaps Ford Motor Company had had a change of heart after 75 and were actually starting to put a bit more funding and a bit more technical support back into Moffat. And I think there may have been a strategic move on Moffat's part as well, because that year he announced that he was going to run a Chevrolet Monza in the Australian Sports Sedan Championship. Now, Moffat was a Ford man through and through, and everyone knew Moffat was a Ford man, so all of a sudden he threw out this hand grenade saying he was going to drive a General Motors product. And I think that may have been the catalyst for Ford going, hang on a minute, what's going on here? So I think there was a real change, and of course there was a real tidal movement there of Ford picking up its game, starting to put more and more into motor racing, and of course 77 it went up another gear.
Moffat's campaign for the 1976 Australian Touring Car Championship suffered a setback when his transporter caught fire on its way to Adelaide, destroying it and the race car.
Moffat had lost his whole racing operation in one fell swoop. But he was still in contention for the championship, so an extraordinary thing happened there. John Goss actually lent Moffat his race car.
We'd prepared for Adelaide, and Grant had taken the car down to Adelaide. By that time I must have been able to afford to stay back and fly, but I had a phone call in my apartment at Rushcutters Bay at 2 a.m. and it was Keith Horner, the late wonderfully generous Keith Horner, who was a great believer in me, and Keith asked me if he explained to me what happened and asked if I'd make the car available to Alan as he was leading the championship, and I didn't hesitate. And it just, apart from anything else, it meant I could have more rest the following morning. But I went down to Adelaide, and I shook the car down initially in private testing on Thursday, and Alan got into the car, and it was a happy arrangement. I remember he had some positive comments about our Bridgestone tyres, and he drove the car through qualifying, or initial practice, I think, on Friday afternoon, and it might have been Friday that I left. I explained to him I was racing at Le Mans, and now that I was relieved from the driving duty in that round of the Drivers' Championship at Adelaide Raceway, that I'd take an earlier flight from Sydney. So I was able to spend most of Saturday with him in the pit lane, and I saw him warm to the car, and again saw the great integrity that he has as a person. and it was further reinforcement of the association we've had for many years, I guess, running Fords. But he was very grateful to have the use of the car, and he was constructive in developing it with some minor changes. And I remember he qualified probably second on the grid. I jumped on the plane and came to Sydney, got down to the airport to board the Pan Am 811 for Los Angeles, and one of the stewards came down and he said, "Did you hear Alan Moffat just won the first round at Adelaide?" And that was it.
He ran that car for 2 rounds, and the fact that he was able to keep his racing going for those 2 rounds and keep himself in the points battle was critical in his victory that year.
Any special plans for the day?
Try and win.
For Moffat and Ford, the 1976 Bathurst race looked good when he managed the fastest time in practice in a newly built car. However, another win on the mountain was not to be, and all the Falcons again failed to last the distance.
Moffat, a little bit sideways there. Rock a bit slow, and it's Bond who goes through very quickly. All Grice making a big effort on the outside, but it's Moffat who's got the lead, first time into the first corner.
Bathurst 1976 is a Bathurst that Alan Moffat would not forget. When people talk about the one that got away, that would certainly be on his list, because he'd built that new car in the space of about 8 weeks in this big break in the Touring Car Championship. They called it the Project Phoenix Falcon, which was quite appropriate because his previous car had been burnt, and out of the ashes rose this brand new XB GT race car. Beautiful car. Very well made, good powerful engines. It was a very quick car. And of course they proved that at Bathurst. Had a great battle for pole position with Peter Brock. Come the race, the Tirana started running into trouble and Moffat was going very, very well. Had a big lead in the race at the point where this problem happened. And it was extraordinary. What took him out of the race was one of the pulley wheels on the engine, which runs the fan belt. It cracked, broke. In the time that broke, the engine water pump stopped turning, so the engine overheated, cooked a head gasket, and Moffat was out of the race. But the extraordinary thing he found out later, and this is one of those inexplicable things that happens when a team is preparing for a big race like Bathurst, for some reason that pulley was taken from the wreckage of the fire in the Adelaide Hills in 1976, because the team had gone through and salvaged a few parts or whatever. But the problem with that pulley wheel is it had gone through that incredibly intense fire. So of course the fire had changed the metal structure of that pulley, which had made it weak, made it brittle. And no one realised this. How this pulley ended up on that Bathurst race engine is anyone's guess, but that's what failed. Because that pulley had been through that heat cycle, it became brittle, it cracked through the fan belt, the engine cooked, blew the head gasket, Moffat was out of the race.
In the following year, there was no pretence from Ford. They were back in the game, and not only that, had put together a super team.
1977 was amazing. You know, big sponsorship, Ford getting right behind it with not only financial support but big engineering support from the factory as well. Moffat brought out a very, very experienced race engineer in Carroll Smith from the United States, who was very, very clever at rule interpretation, and he was able to put that expertise into the preparation of those XB GTs that they ran. And of course the other big thing was Colin Bond, for so long a driver with Holden. He joined Moffat in a 2-car super team, and it really was a super team. The combination of Moffat, Bond, Carroll Smith and all that Ford money and expertise. Well, for the first time in a long time, the fans got to see Ford Motor Company really giving it a go.
And away they go, and Peter and Murray Carter in the middle of the field, diving to the left, looking for somewhere to go. I don't know if he's going to find it because it's a pretty tight pack, and Dickie Johnson down the outside trying to overtake Peter Brock, but it's Alan Moffat and Colin Bond in the old familiar positions of 1-2 as they get away at the start and rocket down the short pit straight towards Tirana Corner.
We'd been with Holden, well, nearly 7 years. We started in 69, went to the end of 76. I was approached by Moffat to join him, in a team, and I think it was just time to move on in a lot of respects. It was better financially for me. He offered me more money than what we're getting. Mind you, we weren't getting very much, but it was still more. And he had Carroll Smith engineering the cars, and I felt that this could be a good change. Now, as it turned out, 77, we won everything.
Moffat still leading the way into Shell Corner and down the straight. Bond, Brock, Harvey, Johnson, O'Brien, Carter.
I spoke to Ford at the time and I said, well, what sort of assistance can you give us? Like you've got a Ford dealer team. And he said, well, the Ford said, well, that's got nothing to do with us, that's the dealers. So it didn't make any difference to my effort in development and in campaigning. So, yeah, unfortunately, and really I would have done it regardless, I funded and I organised and, I used to just run the whole show myself.
Throughout 1977, the Ford Works team could do no wrong, continually taking the top 2 spots during the Touring Car Championship. Moffat and Bond were dubbed the dynamic duo. It was Ford's best season ever.
One year the Ford would be, superior. The following year maybe the Holden would be superior. And that's virtually happened in 77 and then in 78 when the 89X came out and virtually blew the Falcons away. But in 77 we won the Touring Car Championship. Well, Moffat won the Touring Car Championship. Well, first, second at Bathurst. I was second in the Touring Car Championship. And those races, I think Johnny Harvey was in the factory car for Holden. And Moffat was in the lead and I was coming second, so I'd just go back and, a bit of a drive around with John for a while and then come second.
But look at Harvey now. Harvey really putting the pressure on as they come up to lap Keogh. And Keogh almost driving off the track to get out of the way, but Harvey right in the slipstream. And as you said, if he can get in that slipstream, he really might be able to do something about it.
He's going to be a real nuisance now to Bondy.
He's going to push him hard. He's going to try and outbrake him down here. He's creeping up on the left-hand side, but there's a slower car on the right-hand side, but a slower car there. And he can't make it, but he'll push hard now as they come down into this very tight left-hander at Tirana Corner, past the pits. They're working so hard they wouldn't have even had a chance to look at their pit signals that time.
They were very good days, and I think the cars were extremely well engineered, mainly through Carroll, and I think that when you've got the best cars, it makes it easy.
They'd finally got the act together with that Cleveland engine. That was just some of the things they were allowed to do, which they'd been crying out for, made the reliability factor of the Cleveland come to the fore. And it's a good, strong engine. I mean, once you get them running and running right continuously, it's a good, strong engine. It'll go all day, just bang, bang, bang away. I mean, it's a bit heavy and it's a bit antiquated, to say the least. But in those days, it was the best car in the pack.
Heads are staying out wide to let Moffat through. Running the last time down the straight. The checkered flag will be out there waiting for him. There it is. Barry Allen goes through in the Tirana. Alan Moffat takes the flag. Peter Jansen alongside him. Rushes past. He was trying to get one more lap in, of course. Colin Bond second. Very close. And Johnny Harvey in third place. Probably
Moffat
the
and
closest
Bond
finish that we've had
just
in the
steamrolled everybody. It actually caught GMH napping because there had been a level of complacency with the L34 Tirana they'd been running. Because the Ford opposition had been so weak for years, I guess there was a feeling that, oh well, we don't need to spend any money on these cars, we don't need to develop them because they're still winning races, they're still winning championships. But 77 just came up like a sledgehammer and belted them over the head. Those cars were so quick, and the Tirana guys, they just had no answer. So they really were caught napping that year.
Bathurst in that year saw the biggest number of Ford entrants in years, led by Moffat and Bond. Now updated to the latest XC model bodywork, the Moffat team hardtops were effectively GTHO Phase 4s in their ultimate mechanical specification. They staged the most famous finish on the mountain in its history.
The 1977 Bathurst is arguably, the greatest Bathurst victory. And people will argue that till they're blue in the face, because you think about Peter Brock's 6-lap win there in 79, breaking the lap record in the last lap. There's a number of great victories at Bathurst, but I think the one at 77, that Ford 1-2, I think why it sticks in everyone's mind is it was the first time someone had done that with two cars.
Moffat's coming in for a pit stop. This means he'll lose the lead, but he should get it back when the other front runners make their stop. The Belgian Grand Prix driver, Jackie Hicks, will take over.
There'd been some great victories there before, runaway victories by one car. But for Moffat and Bond to come there and hit that mountain with such a head of steam that they were able to roll over the Holden opposition with a new car, with the A9X Tirana, which was an improved version of the L34, which people expected a lot more of.
Moffat's position is now strong. Victory is in sight, but he too has quit this race many times. Just a few
to come there
delay,
and run that race at such a pace, just obliterate the opposition, win the race by more than a lap, and cross the line in that formation 1-2 finish, that was just extraordinary. It was extraordinary then, and it's extraordinary now. It was just an incredible achievement.
This race belongs to Moffat. It will be a fine win, achieved against the immense odds generated by this grueling endurance motor race.
1 lap to go of Mount Panorama, and Colin Bond almost right into the slipstream now of Alan Moffat as they charge up there. They've only got 1 corner to negotiate, and all that money's theirs. And we're looking for them now. There they are, 2 abreast over the last hump, down into the braking area now. Car number 1 just moves slightly ahead, and John Cummins is all yours.
People will argue about the fairness of that finish too, because you know, Moffat was clearly in brake trouble. I think that was more as a result of having Jackie Hicks, the Belgian co-driver, with him that year. Jackie was used to driving very powerful purpose-built Porsches at Le Mans stuff, where brakes really weren't an issue. Whereas I think when Jackie came here driving, which were basically hotted up road cars with pretty marginal brakes, I think Jackie probably got into them a little bit harder than Alan did, and of course by the end of the race they'd run out of brake pads.
Well,
Moffat was trickling around there in the last few laps with his brake pedal on the floor, braking the car purely with the engine braking and shifting the gears. He had no brakes at all. And for Colin Bond to tuck in behind him and hold formation was the mark of a true teammate, I think. I mean, that was the team orders. If there was any issue there, Moffat was always going to be the winner if he could get across the line.
With Colin Bond just sitting in, not making any attempt to manoeuvre. He's playing it strictly to instructions in this, the final half lap of the 1977 Hardy-Ferodo 1000 Classic from Mount Panorama, with Alan Moffat virtually in a limping Falcon with a problem that the team won't tell us about, and Colin Bond driving to orders, just sitting in behind the boss, and that's the way he's going to run out this race.
Well, Alan Moffat might be nursing home a crippled car, but is going to be the leader of a crushing victory to Ford in what has been the most competitive, the fastest and the most international race we've seen here at the Mount Panorama circuit. Colin Bond pulls alongside. I don't think it's a threat to victory. I think it's just to line up the cars. Down the straight they go. Car 1, car 2. An absolute demonstration of the crushing victory to Ford here and the Alan Moffat dealer team. Moffat in car 1, Colin Bond in car. For the last time, they come down in that magnificent view from the 7 helicopter, a scene we've never seen before, side by side. Colin Bond marginally in front, but he'll ease up for the corner and let his team leader through, I would think. But he's in front at the moment. He's going to have trouble braking here to let Moffat through again. Now he does, and Moffat from the outside will sweep around and take the checkered flag first for victory in the 1977 Hardy-Ferodo 1000.
It was his team, and you go there knowing very well that it was going to be, he's the boss. And I think it wasn't until he had the championship actually tied up that we then started winning a couple of the races towards the end of the championship. And the same at Bathurst, you know, I mean, at Bathurst we went there to come first and second, and we virtually did that. But his car was struggling towards the end. Jackie Hicks had driven the car quite quickly, got a minute I think when Hamo was driving my car on us, but sort of used up a fair bit of the front brakes. So eventually towards the end of the race they ran out of front brakes, and we could catch it quite easily, but you know, Carroll gave us the form finish 1-2. It was pretty obvious what we had to do, and that's history now. So it was just the first of the really close finishes, I guess.
On the front row as the Prime Minister drops the flag, away they go. It's Peter Brock who gets away nicely, and Bob Morris who leads the field. Peter Brock back into third spot now as Alan Moffat squeezes him out as they come into Repco corner, but Brock gets back inside, and Brock is second as they come through, followed through by Alan Moffat.
In 1978, Ford may have expected to carry on where it left off. However, Holden was hurting after Ford's Bathurst won too, and was intent on lifting its game. A new HDT team manager in John Shepherd, the return of Peter Brock, and the potent Tirana A9X meant they were ready for revenge. Ford looked different with its XC model Ford Cobra, introduced at the annual Sandown Enduro. But that was about it.
The Cobra was a brilliant bit of marketing by Edsel Ford, who was, of course, a great-grandson of Henry Ford, who was doing his stint at Ford Australia. And Ford had an issue trying to get rid of their old XC Falcon hardtops, because by the end of the 70s, the hardtop had become quite a slow seller, in the same way that the Monaro and the Charger and all those two-door coupes had become. They'd fallen out of favour. So Edsel had to figure some way to clear the decks of these XC hardtops before the new XD Falcon came out. And it was a brilliant bit of marketing.
But there's Moffat in car number 1, the first appearance of the new Cobras, just developed by the Ford Motor Company, and they're the Bathurst car for 1978. They're not really giving too much of a threat to the Tiranas today. Look at the beautiful sleek lines of that Falcon Cobra in the hands of Alan Moffat. He
decided to paint it up in a legendary colour scheme, which goes right back to the 1960s with Carroll Shelby, with the Mustangs and the sports cars he built, all Ford powered, of course. So there was a very strong link between Cobra and Ford, and they came up with this idea to paint these hardtops in this very striking white and blue Cobra paint scheme. They only built 400 of them, and they went like that. So from a marketing viewpoint, very, very clever. But on the racetrack, there was really no difference. All it was a new paint job for the works cars of Moffat and Bond, because they were effectively running the car that they'd been running going right back to Bathurst the previous year.
You'd have to give Colin Bond the A for effort. Yes. Prize, I think, for this particular race.
Well, it wasn't that much different, really, than the previous car. But like everything else, the new model always has some improvements to it. And the improvements were really supposed to make it go faster, you know, but they eventually probably did. But just at the first, few races, and particularly the first time we ran at Bathurst, we sort of had these problems.
At Bathurst, 12 Falcons were entered, but only 4 would finish. A high-profile failure of the heavily promoted Ford Cobras was a bitter pill for Ford and its fans to swallow.
Colin Bond leads from Alan Moffat, who's out there on his left. Bobby Morris is behind him. Johnson has made a great start. Peter Brock behind him.
We qualified okay, we're up the front on the grid at Bathurst. It's talking Bathurst particularly, I guess. And then our car had a gearbox problem. And then Moffat's car later on, it had a bit of a fire where one of the refuelers got burnt, and it had some other dramas. But yeah, they were the old story. I think a new car sometimes comes out and you seem to have some little problems with them, and it takes you some time to get over them. And that particular year we did seem to have some problems, but then I must admit the A9X was a pretty good car as well.
In a race ultimately dominated by Peter Brock and his co-driver Jim Richards, the one consolation for Ford was the third placing by the indefatigable Murray Carter and his co-driver Graham Lawrence in Carter's XC hardtop.
With my situation, finishing Bathurst was the most important priority, and where we finished was just the icing on the cake. And luckily enough that if you ran Bathurst with a scheduled pit stop, you had to be looking good at the end. I was very pleased with the end result, very grateful, because the guys that had been with me, and I had one Ford dealer, Brian Wood, he tipped a bit of money into me, and he'd been with me for a number of years. The guys had all helped me. I only had one guy that I used to have on the staff to help me, but all the guys had helped me. To see the enjoyment that they got out of us being on the podium, that's what pleased me.
Oh, Moffat has made a brilliant start. He's flying and Brock is going. And here they come to that critical first bend.
In 1979, there was no Ford factory involvement once again, as Tirana privateer Bob Morris won the Touring Car Championship and the Holden dealer team dominated the big endurance races. Moffat, Carter, Dick Johnson and others campaigned as Ford privateers. And even though Moffat offered token resistance to the Tirana's superiority at Bathurst, it was all for naught when his engine fell close to the finish while running second. The Falcon hardtop era was drawing to a close.
Our development program was slowed from the lack of not only effort from the team, but also money, and life was getting more difficult business-wise, and so it was a bit unfortunate.
There's the flag up, and down it goes. The Hang 10 400 is on its way, and look at Richards coming out in the big Falcon. He's rounded up Peter Brock already. He's right up here with Colin Bond. There's Bob Morris coming up behind them too, and it's Richards the leader as he slams through.
It had been a memorable time, one in which the stillborn GTHO Phase 4 project actually lived on in a number of different guises. The Falcon hardtops ended up utilising all the improvements that would have made the Phase 4 so special.
I've got some fond memories. They were dramatic cars. The fans loved them. Alan won Bathurst, won the championship. We'd won Bathurst in '74. Pioneered the campaign in '73 with a car that was actually built in late '72. And in those early days, a lot of the componentry came across from the Phase 3s. So they were using the same engines and gearboxes. Axles were wider, of course, wider track. But no, I've got great memories. I think they were unique and different. The earlier GTHO chassis form, and then the two-door coupe, which was based on the American Ford Torino, but with less overhang. It was a damn good car, and it still is today.
I think the Falcon hardtop, it will always be remembered for a number of reasons. One was it was a successful car at Bathurst, and no one can ever take that away from them. They won there in '73, they won there in '74, they won there in '77, and they were all very memorable victories. Another factor with the hardtop, though, is very much an aesthetic one. As a race car, they just looked fantastic. I mean, as a road car, they were quite criticised because they had those really bulbous wheel arches on them which were designed specifically to take really fat race rubber. When they were on the road with their skinny little road tyres, they almost looked like a pregnant cow. You know, they had that sort of ungainly look to them. But when they were on the racetrack, they were lowered, they had the really big rubber on them. They were just a fantastic looking car, they really were, and I think that's what sticks in people's mind more than anything. Just the visual presence of a Falcon hardtop was something you'll never forget.